Hi guys. Yep, got the camera back up. No hole in the wall anymore. Yay. You'll notice all my bits and bobs are not yet back. I'm still working on this, but I thought it was good enough to start shooting on camera again. And from the title of the video, you know what I'm talking about today. Yep. It's one of those things that nobody wants to talk about, but everybody feels obligated to talk about. And I'm going to take something of a different approach than most people, as I always do. So what I want to do today in the wake of the Texas church shooting is talk about anger, because there's this false dichotomy in this debate whenever this happens. We've already got past the initial shock, and I'm probably popping, so I'm going to move that. We've already got past the initial shock. The whole mental health, gun control debate, and then the news cycle is now back to blaming whatever political partisan other they like to beat on to fill airtime. So we're at that point already. And it's only been about, well, when I'm recording this, just over 24 hours since the shooting. And there's all this talk about mental health, mental health, mental health. And yeah, mental health's important. It's easy to say mental health's important, but what the hell does that mean? My big thing about the whole mental health gun control debate is that the current wisdom right now is that, well, people with mental health problems shouldn't have guns. The largest portion, the huge majority of people with mental health conditions are a bigger threat to themselves than anyone else if there is a gun in the house. And if we're going to talk about a temporary removal of firearms from the home to prevent suicides, I'm all for that. That's actually a really useful preventative measure. But this idea that if you are identified as having a mental health condition, you can never own a gun ever, or, not for the foreseeable future. My big concern about that is that it's one more reason somebody's not going to seek help. And that is counterproductive in so many ways. Mental illness can be anything from depression to schizophrenia to bipolar disorder to, just because a person's depressed or just because a person has an anxiety condition doesn't mean they're gonna go out and start shooting people in a church or a school or a country music festival, right? There's more to it than that. And that's where we get to this idea of anger, and specifically culturally, anger being the only acceptable emotion that anybody feels comfortable showing in public. And I get people arguing with me about this. And people got to remember, I keep my comments open, and I am very active on Twitter, less so on Facebook, because the angries on Facebook can manifest in these really, really long comments. On Twitter, somebody needs to be angry in 140 characters at a time. There'd be this contagion effect, because what do people do when they're around an angry person? Well, most people either get totally freaked out or they get angry themselves, in part sometimes because they're totally freaked out. And it becomes this contagion, and it's considered mamby-pamby, wishy-washy, thin-skinned to say, can you take it down a notch? You're freaking me out. That's when you go, oh, grow a thicker skin. This odd perception that it is thick-skinned to be yelling at each other on the internet constantly, claiming you are an advocate for justice or whatever your good cause you're deciding to yell at people for. Yelling at people doesn't solve problems. Yelling at people may make you feel temporarily better because of this catharsis, this blowing off of steam. Now, there are more productive ways to do that than yelling at people on the internet. Anger does have a function. But one thing we need to understand about anger is a lot of the time it's just a mask or a shield. It's so the outside world cannot see how afraid or hurt you are. Because fear and hurt, as people learn at very, very young ages, makes you prey. Anger may back people off. I grew up in a neighborhood where you saw a lot of that. People use this approach to back people off. It's something I can't quite get rid of. There's this one person on Kotaku in Action who absolutely hates my guts on a personal level because of one bad experience they had with me. I have no idea what it is. They never specify. I think it's important to never lose sight that there are people posting on those boards. As much as you may not like them, they are people. And when you stop seeing people as people, that's a problem. So this one person absolutely hates my guts. I have no idea why. They just keep alluding to this tantrum I threw at them one point. I mean, okay, it would be super funny if I was sitting going, I want my milk, I want my dolly. Like, that's what a tantrum conjures up, right? So obviously I told this person off once. They took it very personally and decided that they were just going to flame every post about me on this board forever and ever. And what does that solve? Like, I don't know who this person is. They didn't participate in the Ask Me Anything, the AMA I did on that. They were there the day before and they were right back complaining the day after, but they didn't actually come and confront me so I could find out what the hell this person's issue is. I obviously really upset them. They feel very rejected, but I can't resolve anything based on a screen name. There's no path forward here. This person is just stuck in their anger. And most, there are patrons of mine that still frequent Kotaku in Action. That's part of the reason I keep an eye on it. They just say, oh, people just ignore them. And that's the point. Anger is an indirect way of letting people know something's wrong, that some sort of boundary's been crossed or your feelings have been hurt. But there's so much anger now that it's just become white noise. And so people get angrier and angrier and angrier, and some people cross that threshold of aggrievement where they increasingly run out of options, so that for whatever reason, they think that taking a gun and killing a whole bunch of people before you kill yourself is the best option they have, or the only option they have. And people act like it's oh, they snap and they weren't in their right mind and all that stuff. These acts tend to be planned. They're not the completely irrational frothing at the mouth actions of just a lunatic that we cannot relate to, we can see nothing of ourselves in. These are people who went down a very bad road. And some of that's mental illness, but some of that's bad luck, some of it's a lack of life options, and a lot of it is socialization. It's social programming. It's never being allowed to say, I'm hurt, I'm scared. The only acceptable public emotions are aggression and anger. And like I said, aggression and anger don't solve problems, but a lot of people have been trained to believe they do. And so lives spiral out of control because they get angry, it gets them a bad result, so they get angrier, it gets them a bad result, they get angrier, it gets them a bad result, they get violent, it lands them a criminal record, so they get even angrier because this isn't fair, why is no one helping me, I'm the victim, starting to sound familiar? All these keyboard warriors who said all the right things, but they were clearly very angry. Next thing you know, assault charges, often loved ones, girlfriends, things like that. This is a pattern we know extremely well. It's connected to this idea that grown-ups don't show emotion, grown-ups are bothered by nothing, and so if you're a grown-up and you slip up, the appropriate response to that is punishment. and more punishment and more punishment. And a lot of people live in this feedback loop where if they're not doling out the punishment, they are being punished. Hence the shunning and the no platforming and the dogpiling, instead of this idea that, oh, if you let an offensive person go and speak at wherever, it'll be over, right? Then you don't have to see them again for the foreseeable future because they're not going to have them back until at least next term. Whereas if you run them off, then there's this whole debate and you hear about them far longer and they may reschedule it a few weeks from now. And so you're hearing about them much longer. You are feeding that beast with your conflict, with your choosing to fight that fight when sometimes the only winning move is not to play. This idea that we shout down, grind people down, run them off, try to have these discussions in these mobs, it's completely counterproductive. Because what ends up happening is people just don't talk. They just stop talking. And it gets bottled up, and we all know bottling up emotions is bad. And people bottle up and bottle up and bottle up, and it gets to the point where by the time they let any of it out, it is so destructive. It is like white hot lava, right? And people can't figure out what's going on. It needs to get to a point where things are calm enough that you can actually delve into what's going on. Now, unfortunately, when lives are taken, it never gets to that point. And once you get into that, you get into politics. And once you get into politics, you get into scapegoats. And once you get into scapegoats, you get into marginalization. And once you get into marginalization, you have people that can't get help. And so we get these lost people in the world. And a lot of the people who are demonized in these, giant internet flaming slap fights we get into every 3-4 years like clockwork. The scary thing is I don't know if we're not done the last one or we're due for another one at this point. Maybe it's just been roiling, but people they can't talk about what's really bothering them, so they get horrendously invested in this thing that everybody else is going, I don't get this. But if you actually talk to one of these people who's really, really angry about the latest thing, they'll tell you, look, nothing in my life is in control. This is something I felt I could rely on, and now I can't. And that's what's really going on. And when you take people who are in that state and label them bad, or label them evil, or label them an ist, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a transphobe, that sort of thing, all that may very well be true, but what does slapping a label on that person do? Does it help them? No. They just get angry and retreat further into that anger, and you've just added to the anger that's tearing them apart. Does it help you, the person calling them sexist? No, it doesn't, because now you've got a person who is already consumed by angry at you. And so you just get in this fight, and that may make you feel like a good person in the short term, but you're not doing good, even if you're temporarily feeling good. Now, the way a lot of these online keyboard warriors behave, I don't think they feel good at all. They don't display as very, very happy people. Happy people don't fixate on the traumas that happen to them. What do you feel like you're in control of? And when you're right in the depths of it, nothing. You feel like you're in control of nothing. And there are a lot of people out there who feel they don't have control over anything. That's why fictional worlds matter so much to them. That's why their favorite video game or their favorite comic book or their favorite TV show is so desperately important. It feels like safe, stable ground. They can get into that place and feel like they understand the rules, know how to make those rules work for them, and succeed. And there are a lot of things about the world now that don't give people that sense of security in day-to-day lives. And so they're scared and they're hurt and they're desperate, and all that comes out as anger. Because the most angry people out there, they're seen as tough guys, right? It is an acceptable state. It is more acceptable to go out there and be a complete asshole to someone for very little good reason than it is to say, that hurt, that bothers me, that preys on my insecurities. And again, I'm not advocating you go out there and let every online troll know your soft spots. You know, people say that to me all the time. Why do you give the trolls ammo? It's like, I'm not. Do you think I'm stupid enough to talk about something on this channel or on Twitter that is really, really a sensitive point for me? I talk about this stuff because I'm at a point where I'm okay enough with it to talk about it. And know that some people are going to be assholes about it, but that's all right. Because we can't do anything about what happened in Texas. We can't do anything about what happened in Vegas. We can't do, God, I can't keep track of the mass shootings, the active shootings that are going on. The mosque in Quebec, they're Canada, right there. And I really do believe, and people give me crap about this all the time, but I really do believe that this grow a thicker skin idea is part of the issue with that. Because here's what happens. Growing a thicker skin, creating a stronger vessel for your pent up emotions just keeps those emotions pent up. It's not about growing a thicker skin. It's about changing your filter. It's about finding a way to process, getting a faster processor, adding more RAM to your emotional system. You know, you can't pretend things that bother you don't bother you. You know, if you find yourself saying, that doesn't bother me, I don't care, that's a huge tell for a lot of people. Okay, if you don't care, why do you care enough to say you don't care? It's not true of everyone, but it's a lot more true than even the person saying it, I think, wants to believe. When you say, I don't care, you're giving people an invitation to just say it over and over and over again, right? Because they're trained to pick on other people so they don't get picked on, because you're predator, you're prey in this world, right? You say, I don't care, they're going to keep doing it because they got a reaction. They're seeing you bristle. They're seeing you react, but you've just said you don't care, so you're giving them permission to do it. So don't think about it that way. Think about it as you got to get that anger out in a healthy way that isn't involving freaking out on another person or hurting another person, even emotionally. And how you can do that is a challenge. It takes some trial and error to figure out what works. How do you get closure? How do you put this to bed? What is going to make you feel better instead of just making you so tired you can't be angry for a while and then you get depressed and it all bubbles up again? A lot of people, especially when you're struggling with depression, there's this like black sea of depression, and then there's like this oil slick of anger, and imagine that's on fire, and every time you try to get through the depression you have to go through, you know, the burning oil slick on the black ocean of depression, and that burns, and you got to get through that to finally get, you know, onto mental, spiritual, emotional solid ground. And for a lot of people, faith is the pathway to do it. You hear a lot in the wake of this Texas thing that people are leaning on their faith. And that's just because faith for some people, for people who believe, and it doesn't work unless you believe. So I'm not saying it's a panacea for everybody, because you can't force yourself to believe in something. But faith gives you permission to just move on, to turn the other cheek. You don't feel that requirement to get revenge, to show nobody's gonna pick on you. It's giving you permission to not retaliate. And you gotta find that in your own way. Whether, for me, it works to go, that person's not not a threat to me. That person is more afraid of me than I am of them. That's what helps me. That's how I feel about that person on the Kotaku in Action board who just spits fire every time I mention. Can I do anything about it? Nope. Do I feel bad about it? Yeah, I'm sorry this person's so upset. I don't know what I did. Part of me would like to know, but part of me accepts that maybe being angry at me is doing something protective for that person and they're not ready to put it down yet. You know, I can't do anything about that. And if being angry at me is stopping that person from doing something worse, I'm doing a service in this world, right? That's what helps me, thinking around it and being logical about it helps me. It doesn't necessarily help everybody. You gotta find your own thing. And that's the other thing you don't get when you have a thick skin. You're not open to useful criticism. And that's another thing I never want to be, which is why I reject this idea of growing a thicker skin. And I had a very thick skin when I was younger, and it caused me to behave very aggressively. And I don't like behaving that way. And so I had to step away from that. And that's where this comes from, right? I could do it if I wanted to. I could be the biggest, baddest asshole on this planet. I choose not to be. And it is a choice. You can choose to approach things differently. You can choose kindness. You can choose patience. You can choose all these things we claim are good, but really punish in the world. It's not easy. It's lonely. It doesn't make you very popular, and it tends to make you ignored. But the nice thing about it is you can start to build a collection of real friends as opposed to people who are just using you because it seems like strength in numbers. So hopefully that helped. Hopefully you've listened to something that touched you today. I'm going to leave it there. As usual, I didn't expect it to be that long, but I don't want to say things glibly, do it in 5 minutes and be misconstrued. That's why these videos are so long. I'm going to start experimenting with shorter form stuff in a bit, but I want to do that very consciously and make it very clear that this is different because, oh man, that opens up a whole Pandora's box, right? Right now is not the time to do it. I was going to start it this week, but now's not the time to do it. Things are just too raw. Okay. Thanks for watching.